A bear screamed. That alone would have been odd enough. Bears don't scream. Not like people. Not with that raw, high-pitched terror. But out in the frozen Yukon woods, at 3:42 a.m., something massive tore through the underbrush and made that sound, long, desperate, and unnatural. Max Haynes didn't flinch. He just exhaled slowly through his nose, steam curling off his breath, and reached for the rifle hanging beside his cot. The noise wasn't what set him off. It was the silence that followed. Predators didn't leave silence. They left chaos. Cracking branches, dragging bodies, the crunch of snow and bone. But this time, after that hideous scream, the forest just paused. No owls, no wind, no nothing. The kind of quiet Max remembered only from one place, Bosnia, 1993. Before the convoy disappeared. Before the sky split and bled light. He'd hoped it was a hallucination then. And 20 years had passed with nothing. But tonight, with that scream, he knew better. He stood, cracked his neck, and muttered, "You sons of bitches came back." They didn't call it Earth. They called it Wild Zone E197, and their translation algorithms had labeled it Recreational Biome, Primitive Predator Simulation. From orbit, it was a blue-green novelty, an alien amusement park, the galactic version of paintball with real teeth and real blood. Commander Vorkul stood aboard the skiff, 6 feet of coiled arrogance in living armor, watching his scouts release 4 multi-eyed bone hounds into the forest. The animals bolted down the ramp with a hiss, dispersing across the terrain, searching for hostiles. In his mind, this wasn't a mission. This was sport. The soldiers behind him laughed, some mimicking bear roars with mocking gestures. One held up a holographic image of a moose and zoomed in on its face, distorting it until it looked like a children's cartoon. The aliens chuckled at that too. Earth creatures were soft, ugly, and dumb. Their environments unpredictable but simple. Nothing that could challenge true warriors. Vorkul spat over the railing. Only Yari stayed silent. The young xenobiologist was adjusting his scans, frowning at the electromagnetic anomalies that kept popping in and out of his readings. He tried twice to raise concern about it, but each time was met with a slap or silence. "It's not the trees I'm worried about," he whispered to himself. "It's the quiet ones watching them." Miles below, Max moved like a ghost through the snow, eyes sweeping the ground for impressions. Tracks. Not bear. Not moose. Too wide for human, too narrow for tank. The snow had been disturbed, but there were no boot marks, no toe impressions. Just long, smooth glide lines and a faint, sour chemical smell that made his nose sting. He knelt and scraped his glove over one. The snow sizzled faintly. Artificial heat. Not recent, but not old. "Damn," he muttered. "They've been here 2 nights already." He stood and took the long way back to the cabin, pausing by a tree stump. Inside was a steel box, buried deep in resin and moss, sealed decades ago. He hadn't opened it since 2005. Not even during the Great Recession or when the drones started flying overhead during the blackout years. He pried it open with a crowbar and whistled low. Inside, 3 EMP grenades, a pair of homemade spike mines, and a knife forged from salvaged satellite metal. The blade shimmered in the moonlight like it wanted blood. He looked at the gear and then up at the stars, narrowing his eyes. Round 2. Elsewhere, not far from the edge of the forest, Anya Patel was starting to regret every decision she'd made that had led her here. She had been out collecting samples for the University of Toronto, part of a research grant on glacier decay and fungus patterns. She'd expected frostbite, maybe the occasional wolf sighting. Not abduction. Definitely not cages made of humming light and a bald, 4-eyed alien poking her with something that buzzed. She'd tried to scream. They'd muted her voice. She'd tried to fight. They paralyzed her. Now she sat in a transparent container while some gelatinous creature with a lab coat drooped nearby, staring at her through 5 blinking nostrils. "What the hell are you even testing me for?" she yelled, voice bouncing uselessly inside the dome. The creature drooped further. She got the impression it wasn't even the scientist. maybe a janitor. Either way, she wasn't about to die inside an interstellar science fair. She started scanning the walls for anything, seams, inconsistencies, faults. She'd been in enough labs to know, no system was perfect. Back in the forest, the alien hunters finally got cocky enough to split up. One chased a deer through a gully, vanishing behind a ridge. His communicator fizzled briefly, then went dead. Vorkul barked an order, annoyed, not alarmed. But then the scream came, not a bear's this time, but one of theirs. Gurgled, short, terminated too fast for a good death. "What was that?" a soldier asked. Vorkul stared into the woods. He saw nothing but shadow. Max had watched the idiot run straight into the trap. Lured him with an old rabbit distress call and a rigged heat signature. The alien didn't even notice the two sharpened steel rods on either side of the narrow crevice. Not until they punctured both lungs. Max had waited until the body stopped twitching, then scavenged the belt. Some kind of communicator, a scanner, a stunner rifle. Crude tech, despite the alien arrogance. He hung the alien upside down from a tree with a note carved into its armor. "Still think this is a game?" The others would find it. That was the point. Vorkul did, an hour later. He stood beneath the swaying corpse and read the message 3 times. "Primitive language," he said, sneering. But his sneer twitched. A bead of green sweat traced down his brow. "Who hunts us?" one of his soldiers whispered. Vorkul turned, voice sharp. "No one hunts us. This is a fluke. An accident." But even Yari noticed how his hands didn't stop shaking. In the woods, Max sat by a fireless pit, sharpening his knife. The raccoon beside him chittered and tried to steal jerky from his pocket. He flicked it away with a grin. "They don't get it, Stripe. They think wild means weak. They think nature's just some setting. But they don't know what the wild really is." He glanced up, eyes dark with memory. "It remembers." Above them, in the alien skiff, Anya Patel found a seam. A weak point in the power grid running along the floor. And she had an idea. A really stupid, probably fatal idea. But it might just work. The alien ship shimmered against the clouds, a warped reflection of moonlight and cloaking tech struggling to keep up with Earth's atmosphere. The predators on board were losing confidence. One of their own now swung from a tree like some grotesque forest ornament, and the message carved into his armor. It was not just taunting. It was calculated. Vorkul had crushed the communicator in his hand after reading it, but the cracks in his authority were showing. His soldiers avoided his gaze. None of them laughed at Earth's ecosystem now. Yari studied the corpse quietly. His mind spun, not with fear, but fascination. Whatever this creature was, the one hunting them, it had strategy. Not instinct. Not desperation. Strategy. It knew alien tech. It knew their language, their weapons, their ego. And it was using all of it against them. Yari's eyes narrowed slightly. Earth wasn't primitive. They were just too arrogant to see it. On the forest floor, Max knelt by a half-frozen stream, scrubbing alien blood off his knife with snow. It hissed faintly, still hot. The blade, forged from fallen satellite scrap, had held up well. Better than expected. He had the alien's belt now, ripped tech and gear tucked into a deerskin satchel. Most of it he didn't recognize, but some parts looked familiar. Energy cells? Pulse rifle. Short-range biometrics. He'd have to gut the rest, rewire it into something useful. You couldn't trust alien tech raw. You had to speak its language first, then twist the grammar. The trap that killed the scout was only phase 1. That was the message. Now came the war. Not guns blazing kind. The wilderness kind. Where patience and silence became weapons. Where knowledge of terrain beat any plasma cannon. Max knew the Yukon better than anyone alive. He didn't need satellites. He had instincts and rage. He started with the mines. Not military issue, but handcrafted from scrap metal and copper wire, buried beneath snow along paths only humans or fools would follow. Then came the sound traps, speakers hidden in tree trunks that emitted recorded prey noises. Screams. Howls. Baby bear cries. Enough to pull any alien tracker in with an ego. Then the diversions, heat packs, fake movement, old mannequins dressed in fur and baited with predator musk. Max wasn't just setting traps. He was writing a story, a narrative of fear, and letting it unfold under their feet. The raccoon, Stripe, followed him everywhere, twitchy and nosy. Max talked to him like a partner, giving him field orders and nicknames for alien soldiers. That tall one with the breathing tubes? He's lanky. Probably breaks easy. The twitchy one? That's Nervous Ned. We're saving something special for him. Back aboard the ship, panic was creeping in, even if no one would say it out loud. Vorkul paced the command deck while drones swept the forest, their scanners flickering from interference. Earth's magnetosphere messed with targeting systems, and this region in particular had been flagged as unstable. But they'd ignored that. Too eager for a clean, fast hunt. Now they were dealing with a ghost in the snow. Another scream burst through the comms, then cut short. The display blinked. Drone 7 offline. Life form's signature terminated. Vorkul slammed his fist onto the console. He ordered a perimeter lockdown. Ground troops. No more games. No more arrogance. 2 soldiers were sent out on patrol. They didn't come back. Yari quietly downloaded a copy of the last drone footage onto his personal device. It showed a figure. Not alien. Human. Masked. The forest lit up like a second sunrise as the alien skiff discharged an orbital burst into the valley below. Trees vaporized. Ice cracked for miles. Snow turned to mist in the blast radius. But the moment the smoke cleared and scanners recalibrated, there was no target. No body. No heat signature. Nothing. Just charred trees and scorched earth. Commander Vorkul stood at the helm, jaws clenched tight. It was meant to be a show of force. A reminder that their enemy was dust. Instead, it confirmed what he feared most. This was no ordinary prey. This was someone who understood them, and worse, someone who didn't panic. Max had watched the strike from half a mile away, crouched behind an ice wall he built 3 years ago for a different kind of storm. The detonation had flattened everything north, just as he predicted. But he wasn't up there. He was waiting here. The strike had cost them energy, attention, and time. And now they'd want to comb the zone, clean up the mess, search for remains. That meant boots on the ground, exposed, nervous, scattered. Max's kind of game. Down inside one of his hidden trenches, a figure moved toward him, fast, quiet. He gripped his blade, ready, but then relaxed. It was her. Anya. Somehow she'd gotten out. She ducked into the trench and collapsed beside him, breathing like she'd outrun hell itself. Her coat was singed, one sleeve burned down to the elbow. She smelled like plasma and ozone. Max gave her a sideways glance and handed her a thermal wrap. "You break out, or they let you out?" he asked. "Broke. Kind of. It was messy." She pulled a data core from inside her jacket and held it out. "This thing's got their ship layout, comms grid, and a whole list of bad ideas." Max looked it over, surprised. "How'd you get this?" "I'm a scientist. I notice things. Like how their janitor drones share network access with their command consoles. Don't ever underestimate someone who knows what a loose wire can do." He let out a dry laugh. She grinned. Then her face fell serious. "They're calling reinforcements." Max's jaw tightened. "Figures. Kill a few of their own, they'll want to send a cleanup crew." "No. It's bigger than that. They weren't supposed to break protocol. That orbital strike? Total violation of the Outer Sphere Hunting Accords. They're hiding it. But if they get found out, Earth won't just be a wild zone anymore. It'll be considered a rogue planet." Max frowned. "And rogue planets don't get warnings. They get wiped." They both sat in silence for a moment. The snow around them sparkled, oblivious. Then a faint vibration tickled Max's senses. Footsteps. He jerked his head toward the tree line. "We've got company." It was a scout group. 5 soldiers. Advanced armor. Scanners out. Sweeping the sector where Max was last seen. What they didn't realize was that their own equipment was broadcasting enough heat to light up a cave bat's wedding. Max could smell the artificial coolant leaking from one of their boots. He nodded at Anya. "You still trust me?" "Less with every passing second," she said. "Good. Stay low." He triggered the trap. It began with a sonic burst, inaudible to humans, but weaponized directly at alien auditory nerves. The nearest soldier dropped, convulsing. 2 others stumbled, just as the second trap activated, a mine made of pressurized liquid nitrogen and broken ceramic. The explosion wasn't loud, but it shattered the legs of one, freezing metal joints mid-step and dropping him like a statue. The last 2 panicked, spraying plasma fire into the trees. Bad idea. Trees burned. Smoke obscured everything. Max moved through it like water, sliding between cover. One swing of his satellite blade, and the 4th soldier hit the ground. The last tried to run. Max let him. He wasn't trying to eliminate all of them. Just enough to make the survivors talk. That night, back in the trench, Anya and Max sat over the stolen alien device she'd recovered. She was rerouting the power with scraps from a downed drone. Max watched her work, impressed. She muttered constantly, like the circuits would behave better if she guilt-tripped them. He finally broke the silence. "They're not gonna stop, are they?" "No. Not until you're dead. Or they are." He nodded. "Then we make it final." An hour later, a signal pinged quietly through the alien ship's encrypted system. A hidden channel. Unauthorized. 1 receiver. Yari. He read the message twice before answering. The reply came in coordinates. A meeting point. Yari left the ship under cover of a maintenance check. His path through the woods was careful, erratic. He didn't want Vorkul's eyes following. When he arrived at the coordinates, he found Max waiting, crossbow in hand, relaxed, but ready. Anya stood behind him with a plasma pistol set to stun. Yari raised his hands. "I'm not here to fight." Max didn't lower the bow. "Then talk. I've studied this planet for 3 years. You're not like the others. And Vorkul, he's gone off book. That strike? He should have been recalled. But he's hiding it. If Central Command finds out, they'll terminate the mission, and maybe him. So rat him out," Max said. "Send the footage." I tried. He has the entire bridge locked under isolation code. It needs physical override. From inside. I can help. But I'll need cover. A distraction. And backup. Anya stepped forward. "Why should we trust you?" Yari looked at them, then at the forest behind them. "Because you're the only ones who've ever beaten us at our own game. And because if we don't stop this, Earth becomes a fuel station. One that doesn't stay intact." That night, the 3 of them finalized a plan. Yari would infiltrate the bridge and disable the command AI. Anya would hack the defense net and feed Max coordinates of the shield gaps. Max would do what he did best, hunt. But this time, he wasn't working alone. As dawn broke, the forest was already humming with alien drones. Max looked up at the light filtering through the trees and muttered to himself. "This is it, Stripe. The main event." The raccoon stared at him blankly, then bit into a protein bar. From inside the ship, Vorkul was preparing his own offensive. He knew now that this wasn't about a hunt. This was about honor. About control. And about sending a message to every species watching. Kill the human, silence the traitor, burn the forest. Simple. But Earth had never been simple. And Max Haynes was about to remind them why you don't go poking around where the wild still has teeth. The storm rolled in faster than forecasted, not that anyone in the Yukon really trusted forecasts. The sky cracked open in jagged streaks of white lightning, and the wind screamed through the trees like it had something to say. Snow came next, thick, heavy, swallowing sound and sight. For most, it was a nightmare. For Max Haynes, it was the best cover he could have asked for. The chaos of nature was always better than silence. It meant the forest was alive, unpredictable, and ready to do half his work for him. The timing couldn't have been better. Anya was already embedded in the defense grid, her hands moving over alien controls like she'd been born to them. With Yari feeding her override codes, she'd managed to drop one section of the ship's shield, a 20-second window, just enough for Max to slip through. He moved across the clearing, cloaked in snow and shadow, every step practiced, every breath controlled. He wore no tech. Tech got you tracked. He wore wolf hide, mud ash. He smelled like the storm. Nothing in their scanners could replicate that. Inside the bridge, Vorkul paced like a caged beast. He'd already lost 2 more scouts overnight. The video feed showed flashes of movement, heat signatures that vanished before they could be locked. His soldiers were rattled. Some whispered about the human having some kind of power. That Earth wasn't just alive, it was conscious. That the forest itself fought for him. Vorkul hated superstition. He hated fear even more. But he couldn't deny that everything about this hunt had gone wrong. And now there were whispers of Yari's absence, rumors leaking like gas through steel. Trust was crumbling. Yari moved through the corridors, calm on the outside, boiling inside. He'd betrayed his kind. But what was left of his kind if this was who they were? They'd crossed the line, using Earth as a fuel source, a game board, a lab. He'd seen what that meant. Whole planets drained, left as husks spinning through space. Earth still had a chance. If he could reach the core override in time. Anya watched him through the security feed, whispering directions to him through the comm link. Left. Then vent shaft. There's a soldier near the junction, use the shadow panel. She made it sound like a video game, but they both knew how real this was. One wrong turn and he wouldn't be defecting. He'd be dissected. Max was already inside by then. The moment the shield flickered, he dashed across the field, vaulted over a cargo railing, and slipped into the hull. He didn't need a map. He just followed the scent of steel and arrogance. The walls hummed with alien electricity, but Max didn't care. He moved with the calm of someone who'd accepted death, not feared it. He had a mission. And he had a gift for improvisation. He left gifts behind as he went, little traps, diversions. EMP seeds made from the core of alien flashlights. Shards of their own armor turned into motion tripwires. A repurposed drone with a fake human heat signature, pre-recorded screams looped inside its frame. Let them chase ghosts. Let them think they'd cornered him. He wanted them nervous. A nervous hunter always makes mistakes. Then came the final breach. Yari reached the core. He placed his hand on the control panel. It rejected him once. Twice. Then accepted. Barely. He was still one of them, technically. The door hissed open. Inside, a living sphere hovered above the chamber floor, pulsing with energy. The ship's brain. One wrong move, and it would fry him like meat. He approached slowly, slid the data spike into the slot Anya had designated, and braced for the backlash. It came. A surge of static, a wave of nausea, and then a click. The ship blinked. Every screen on the bridge flickered. Every drone in the forest lost contact for 3 seconds. Just enough. Max used that moment to strike. He hit the bridge like a meteor, a blur of claws and fire. Plasma bolts ricocheted off the walls. Vorkul turned and roared, drawing his energy blade, and charged. The two collided like titans, one armored in alien metal, the other wrapped in bone and fury. Max fought dirty. He used broken glass, pressure points, environment. Vorkul was stronger, but Max had the advantage of unpredictability. He slammed the alien's head into a console, grabbed a shattered pipe and drove it through the lower torso. Vorkul howled, swinging wildly, tearing open Max's shoulder. Blood sprayed. Max didn't stop. He wrapped an old wire around Vorkul's wrist, yanked him down, and drove the satellite knife into his chest with both hands. "You were right," Max said, panting. "We're primitive." Vorkul gasped, blood bubbling. "You are filth." Max leaned in. And you? You're not a god. You're just another dumb predator who thought the zoo didn't fight back. He twisted the blade. Vorkul fell. Anya's voice crackled through the calms. Shields down. Yari's alive. You! Max winced, clutching his side. Still ticking. From orbit, the alien command station received the emergency signal. They saw the unauthorized strike. They saw the override logs. They saw the footage, Yari's face, Max's ambush, Vorkul's last moments. And they made a decision. Earth was too costly. Too wild. Too unpredictable. They sent the abort signal. Yari received it. He smiled, blood on his lips. They're pulling out. It's done. Anya watched the skiff lift off from the forest floor, engines glowing. It turned, hesitated for a breath, and vanished into the upper atmosphere. Max stood beneath it, snow melting on his wounds. He watched it go like someone watching a storm pass. He didn't cheer. He just let the silence return. Later, at the edge of the tree line, Anya found him sitting near a fire. Stripe the raccoon curled on his lap. She sat beside him and offered a flask. Didn't think we'd win, she said. Max took the flask. We didn't win. We just reminded them this planet isn't theirs. She looked at him, her expression softening. You going back into hiding? Yup. Why? He looked at the trees, the snow, the stars. Because next time they come back, I want to be ready. She laughed. Next time? You really think they're dumb enough to come back after that? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. 1,000 miles away, deep in a jungle, another alien scout ship touched down. A lone figure stepped out, scanning the surroundings, confident. Its foot landed on something. Click. Welcome to Earth. The scout never even had time to scream. The pressure mine embedded under the moss detonated with surgical precision, not a grand explosion but a clean, sudden blast that vaporized the lower half of the alien's body. The rest of it crumpled sideways in a twitching heap of armor and steaming flesh, its weapon clattering to the jungle floor beside the remains. In the thick canopy above, birds scattered in a wild frenzy, shrieking warnings too late for the intruder to understand. The jungle, like the tundra, did not care who you were. It only answered one question: do you belong? And the scout most certainly did not. Miles away, Max sat at a cabin table cobbled together from 4 different kinds of wood and 1 old airplane wing. He poured black coffee into a chipped tin mug, wincing at the twinge in his shoulder. The healing was slow this time. Alien blades didn't just cut, they seared, poisoned, hummed with energy long after the wound. Anya had patched him up well enough to keep his arm from falling off, but the scar would probably glow in the dark if he ever got near a microwave. He sipped the coffee and stared at the satellite feed patched into the screen he'd bolted to the wall. It showed Central America. Dense heat, fluctuating magnetic fields, and one flicker that didn't belong. They were back. Or maybe they never left. The peace hadn't lasted long. For weeks, maybe 5. Just enough for the world to return to ignoring its monsters. The official reports had written off the orbital anomalies as solar interference. The attacks in the Yukon were blamed on experimental drone weapons gone rogue. The footage Anya released had been laughed off as deepfake propaganda. She lost her research grant. Max wasn't surprised. Earth's most consistent survival trait had always been denial. It took a lot to get the planet's attention. A slow apocalypse wouldn't cut it. It had to be something with teeth. Anya hadn't left the continent. She'd gone south, following electromagnetic spikes and random sensor pings that matched alien tech. She wasn't just tracking them now, she was baiting them. Leaving digital breadcrumbs, coded signals, false transmissions meant to lure another scout team. She wasn't just a scientist anymore. She was hunting. Yari had vanished into the stars. After disabling the ship's core AI and exposing Vorkul's violation to the Council, he was a fugitive among his own kind. Max had only received one message since. A garbled transmission with coordinates, a warning, and 3 words in Earth English: not over yet. Max knew what that meant. The retreat hadn't been a surrender. It was a reset. Earth had earned their attention now. No longer a wild zone. A threat. And threats needed monitoring. So Max prepared? Again. He returned to old caches buried during darker years. Reprogrammed scavenged drones with new protocols. Modified their behavioral AIs with raccoon logic, unpredictable, mischievous, impossible to track. Stripes seemed proud. He followed Max around like a war buddy, stealing food and mimicking his sneaking routines like a soldier in training. Max didn't mind. Talking to a raccoon wasn't the strangest part of his life anymore. Back in the jungle, another scout team arrived to find the first reduced to a smear. They spread out, cautious now, scanners up, weapons ready. But nothing beeped. The jungle ate signals. That was the first mistake they made, relying on tools instead of instinct. The second mistake was assuming the threat would come from ahead. It didn't. Max's trap came from the ground. The Claymore-style device detonated upward, shredding the first scout from the knees to the jaw. Its companion turned, already reacting, only to step into a tripline that unleashed a swarm of sharpened bamboo darts soaked in acidic sap. That one lived for a few seconds longer, twitching, clawing at its helmet, before going still. Max was watching from a tree 300 feet away through an old rifle scope. He lowered it slowly. Took a breath. He wasn't alone. Anya stepped up beside him, covered in mud and camouflage, her hair matted from the rain. She didn't say anything for a while, just watched the carnage below. Then finally, 2 down. 6 more inbound. They're coming in squads now. Max nodded. Patterned approach? Same. Circular sweep. Wide flanks. But they're starting to adapt. Shorter response times. Smarter. Max narrowed his eyes. Still predictable. Barely. They climbed down and moved, fast and low. Anya had mapped the terrain weeks earlier, found a network of caves buried beneath the roots of the jungle. Ancient lava tubes, once dormant, now perfect for ambush tunnels. Max had already turned 3 of them into kill zones. The 4th would be where they lured the rest. But this time, it wouldn't just be for elimination. It would be a message. Anya had managed to hack a transmitter drone recovered from one of the scouts. If they could sync the footage from this ambush with the galactic network Yari had used, they could beam it straight to whatever bureaucratic council managed these blood games. And they wouldn't show bodies. They'd show something worse. Intelligence. Resistance. Unity. 3 things that made empires nervous. In the tunnel, they set the final trap. Anya rigged the transmitter to a thermal relay, synced to Max's heartbeat. If his pulse dropped for more than 10 seconds, the message would auto-broadcast. Failsafe. She didn't like it. He didn't argue. The scouts arrived just before dusk. They moved like phantoms, silent, efficient. But the jungle betrayed them. A cracked leaf. A shift in wind. The glint of armor through vines. Max struck first. Anya followed. Gunfire lit the darkness. Explosives echoed through stone. One alien went down to a pit of spikeweed. Another got crushed beneath a deadfall trap triggered by tripwire. Max took to himself, blade in hand, raw and brutal. The last one was cornered by Stripe, who hissed and clawed at its helmet like a rabid gremlin until Max finished the job. The jungle went quiet again. They sat beside the wreckage, breathing hard. Anya wiped blood from her cheek, her hands shaking. "That's all of them," she said. Max didn't answer. He was watching the transmitter drone fly up into the sky, its signal blinking green. It had already sent the footage. It was done. Or at least, that part was. Back in orbit, somewhere in the cold reaches of the system, a silent council watched the footage. Human faces. Alien corpses. Coordinated attacks. A woman reprogramming their drones. A man who'd turned Earth into a graveyard with traps and bare hands. There was silence. Then murmurs. Then a decision. Earth was to be marked. Not as a hunting ground, but as a quarantined world. No approach. No contact. Not because it was too weak. Because it was too dangerous. Because something on that little blue rock fought back. Because predators had learned the hard way. This jungle had teeth.